Which celeb is dressed up as a singing chicken? I at the last sweet and sour pork ball. And the next, Clark Crackers, you're a millionaire. Lotto, will you be next? Play on now, the National Lottery. Account terms, rules, procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Matt Fry.
As I said at the beginning of the program, I'm in Miami, Florida. I'm not here on a holiday, I promise you. I'm not going to be dipping my toes into the warm waters of the Atlantic, or maybe just a bit. I'm here to do a documentary film for Channel 4 about the presidential campaign, and especially trying to imagine what the first 100 days of a second Trump administration would look like. And frankly, no one is more interested in this election result than people in Israel, or indeed the occupied Palestinian territories, or people in Ukraine. In both cases, the election of Donald Trump would have a massive impact and have huge consequences for the wars that they are fighting. The Israelis can count on, wholesale support from President Trump. None of the criticism that they've been getting, albeit belatedly, from President Joe Biden. I don't think Trump would ever threaten the Israelis with a withdrawal of arms or firepower if they didn't do right by the Palestinians. I can't see that happening. And people here know that, so that a lot of people are pro-Israel, even more pro-Trump than they were before. And at the same time, of course, in Ukraine, arguably there, it really is existential, because if Trump is elected, he has said that he would end the war in 24 hours, which to many Ukrainians would mean a denial of American firepower, and therefore Russia would be able to do what it wants to do, and the war would end very quickly after that, possibly with a Ukrainian insurrection to follow. The reason why this is so important is that Ukraine already knows what that might feel like, because it's feeling the privations of delayed American weapons and munitions right now. It is because these weapons were held up in Congress by essentially a fight within the Republican Party that the Ukrainians were unable to stop the Russian advance across the border from Belgorod towards the second city of Kharkiv. The Russian forces are now getting closer and closer to that second city, and they could be in a position to use artillery against that city in the coming weeks, and that would be fundamental to the people of Kharkiv. It's watching their bunkers in the last 2 years. They've been able to have a relatively normal life, but withdrawing into their bunkers, into their underground system, in order to find shelter. At the same time, there's pressure on the eastern front line in Donbass. There's pressure in the south. Zelensky, just a few minutes ago, declared on Ukrainian television, our troop shortages is sapping the morale on the front line. So not just a shortage of weapons, but a shortage of men and women to send to the front line. This is not a shortage that the Russians have to deal with, because they have a much larger population. So there's a lot to discuss there. We'll get to the military picture with Hamish de Bretton-Gordon after 15:15. But let's talk to Maria Avdieva first. She's a security and defense analyst and director of the European Expert Association. And she's
in
a
50
citizen
meters.
of Kharkiv, where she was recently, but now she's in Lviv in western Ukraine. Maria, good morning to you.
Turn left.
Good morning, Matt. Thank you for having me.
It's good to speak to you again, and these are very, very difficult circumstances. Can you describe to us what it's like in Kharkiv at the moment? What the citizens there are feeling and what they're afraid of?
Well, the most difficult situation is in two cities. These are Liptsi and Vovchansk, which are close to Kharkiv. Liptsi is just about 20 kilometers away, where Russia is currently advancing. So there are street fightings in Vovchansk. Liptsi is held by Ukrainian army. The good news is that Ukrainian armed forces were able to stop Russian advance, or at least to slow it down, because it wasn't easy with the shortages of ammunition that Ukrainian army is facing. But as you said correctly, if Russian troops will be able to advance further, this will put the city of Kharkiv in the range of Russian artillery fire, and we have seen
50 meters. Turn left.
Terrible consequences when Russian troops were smashing the whole residential areas in the city. And this is why people in Kharkiv are quite nervous. Actually, they already see the glow and can hear the distant roar of the artillery fighting, and also Russia is constantly bombing the city of Kharkiv with gliding bombs, and there is actually nothing, not much you can do with them. Only the fighter jets would help if Ukraine would be able to shut down the Russian jets that launch these bombs, but they are not on the battlefield, as we know.
I mean, I know
GPS
from when I was in
signal
Kyiv at the
lost.
beginning of the war,
Navigation
and you
resumed.
could hear the bombardments, on the outskirts. There's something terribly scary, something very frightening about being trapped in a city when you feel the bombing is getting closer and closer, but nothing worse if that city is threatened by artillery. So just describe to us that feeling of being inside a city like Kharkiv, and you can hear the distant thud of the artillery getting closer and closer. You feel trapped, don't you?
Well, absolutely. People now are more confident and more determined to fight back, because the Russian attack did not caught them in surprise. They already knew what to be prepared for. A lot of people have their necessities packed, and many say that they are not planning to leave in any case. So no matter what happens, they believe the armed forces will be able to defend the city, because you see that Russia does not have enough power and does not have enough troops to capture the city itself, but they have enough and much more to continue terrorizing Kharkiv, and this is what they
continue
will do.
straight.
So this means that people in the city, they try to stay inside as much as possible. There is a constant air alert. It almost doesn't stop now, because the bombardments and missiles are launched every hour, and on residential areas in the city center. And you never know where this gliding bomb will hit. This is why people try to be inside. Those who have children, they consider safer to go out.
Continue straight.
For a while to see how the situation develops. Others, like I've talked to people who run businesses in Kharkiv, they say they try to make logistics easier so that people do not have to be on the streets for a lot of time. So people are kind of dig in, trying to hide as much as possible in the face of Russian advance.
I mean, Kharkiv is difficult to describe to those who haven't been there, but it's
continue
it's a very
straight,
edgy, trendy, young city, isn't it? It reminds me a little bit of sort of Shoreditch in London, with elements of Manchester. I mean, it's a very vibrant place. It had a great university. It has a great university, and the resilience of people there is astonishing, frankly.
At the roundabout, take the second
Zelensky
exit.
says, we are running out of men, and that is sapping our morale. And when I spoke to him back in January, in his bunker-like office in Kyiv, he wouldn't go that far, but he is now going that far publicly. That shows you that the situation has become more dire.
Keep right. Then turn right.
Does. And also we see all these people who are evacuated now from Vovchansk and surrounding areas. They are coming to Kharkiv, and they tell awful things what they have been going through during the occupation, and now it's facing them again. This is why they run. They don't want to be trapped again under Russian occupation. And people in Kharkiv know perfectly well what Russian occupation and Russian terror attacks bring. So people are bracing themselves for what might come next. And the situation is indeed critical, because Russia hasn't, not all the troops are now in Ukraine, because Russia has a lot of in reserve in the territory of Belgorod region, which is just across the border. And the
in
thing
50
that
meters,
makes people
turn
angry
left.
Is that Ukraine is not allowed to use Western weapons to hit those troops on the territory of Russia. So basically, we are watching how Russia is preparing and concentrating more troops, unable to hit them with Western supplied weapons because it's not allowed for Ukraine to do. And these and the number of factors, like the lack of personnel, people exhausted, this all adds to the situation where people feel a lot of stress and threat because of the coming and the ongoing offense.
Because there's a very strange reality here, isn't there, Maria? That on one hand, you couldn't fight this war.
In 50 meters, turn left.
And one could argue easily that these weapons have been held up for too long, which is why we're getting this terrible situation at the moment. But on the other hand, the West is not giving you all the means to fight this war, even though defend Western values because they're still afraid of what Russia might do if it ends up losing this war.
Absolutely. I'm currently in Lviv. I was speaking to a brilliant talk of British philosopher and historian Timothy Garton Ash, and he just said that this is what is happening. The West does not want Russia to lose completely, and he says when you are watching a football game, you can only, like, one team has to lose and one has to win. There is no in-between action, and there is no possibility, like, to let Russia not lose the game or not lose this war, because only total Russian defeat will lead to the change of the situation. And for this, we need all the military capabilities and all the means, including possibility to hit military targets inside Russia, because this is what Russia uses to continue this war.
Finally, and very briefly, Maria, if you don't get what we need from the West, and we've asked this question repeatedly every few months or so, do you now believe, with the state of the war that it's in right now, that
Continue
you could actually end
straight.
up losing eventually to Russia?
Well, no, I don't believe in that, because I know that people in Ukraine will fight till the last. I mean it, because they know that if Russia wins, this will mean that these people who are now living in cities like Lviv and others, they will be subjected to go to Russian army and fight against the European armies where Russia will go further. This is why this is not a scenario that Ukrainians and me personally are seeing. But what could happen
At
is
the roundabout,
that the Russian
take the
advance,
first exit.
will go further. So the best scenario for now for Ukraine
Take
will
the
be
exit.
that we have enough to stop, but like get more development capabilities, also technological.
At the roundabout,
and,
take the second exit.
like, use everything we have later to push out the Russians, because for now the stakes are that we have to
Take the
stop
exit.
Russian advance. We need to have at least
Keep right.
capabilities to do that.
Then, turn right.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Maria Avdieva, thank you very much indeed.
Turn
Talking to us
right.
from Lviv in western Ukraine, but she is, of course, from Kharkiv, the second city currently under bombardment from the Russians, with Russian artillery moving perilously close. And we'll be speaking to Hamish de Bretton Gordon about the military picture, the strategic picture, after the break. I'm Matt Fry. This is LBC. The time is now 11:50.
This is LBC.
When Brian and Sheena from the Cardiff motorway, they got more money. They then used that extra money to buy a camper so that their dog Bruce could enjoy the local nature. Bruce, come here, boy. So, Bruce, are you happy your owners used the motorway? Bruce, you can't use language like that on the radio. Sell your car anyway. With 84% of sellers sold for more. Motorway. Validated against 2 independent
Continue
sources.
straight.
Visit motorway.co.uk/claims.
It's important to look
came into effect today. Prisoners will now be allowed to join, and fines have gone up for men who ignore the order to fight. Ukraine's forces are perilously low, not just of weapons, but also of men. The weapons have finally arrived after Congress approved them a few weeks ago. But again, if they had arrived earlier, then the situation on the front line would not be as perilous as it is at the moment. Now, to get a picture of just how perilous it is, let's speak to Colonel Hamish Gordon, defence commentator for the Telegraph, amongst others, who served as commander of
Keep right. Then, take the exit on the right.
nuclear threat unit, and who's now joining us, I think, from Salisbury.
Take the
Good morning,
exit on the
Hamish.
right.
Matt, yeah, that's right, from Salisbury. Good morning. We must put everything on the table and we must make Putin think. At the moment, we're just telling him exactly what we're going to do and not going to do, and he's got the strategic advantage. We must get that back.
Okay. Colonel Hamish de Breton Gordon, thank you very much as ever. We're going to leave it there. The question to you is, are we doing enough to help Ukraine? Should we be doing more? Should we be sending more air power? Should we possibly, even at the end of the day, be sending our soldiers to fight their war? As they would say, it's also our war. It could become at the end of the day. 0345 6060 973. Are we doing enough to help Ukraine? After the break, Simon Marks in Washington. He's getting up almost as early as I got up this morning to talk to us about American politics and the presidential race. I'm Matt Front. This is OBC. The time's now 11:30. Time for the news with Jenny Martin.
The MP for Brixham has told us heads will roll after water supplies in his constituency were contaminated by a microscopic parasite. 46 people have become ill. The head of the South West Water Company has apologised. LBC's been told the families of two hostages whose bodies were recovered in Gaza were unaware their relative had died. The remains of three people were kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival on October the 7th and now been sent back to Israel. And the number of migrants crossing the Channel in small boats has reached a new record high for the first 5 months of the year. 9,681 have arrived in the UK since the beginning of 2024, beating the previous high of 9,607, which was set 2 years ago. LBC weather, sunny spells and showers for most of us. It will be wettest in the south, with temperatures reaching 22 degrees.
LBC.
Meet Darren. Darren never used to like the motorway. Then one day, he discovered a better way to drive. Now Darren never hogs the middle lane and always keeps at least 2 seconds from the vehicle in front, reducing congestion, collisions and transforming his journey. Take it away, Darren.
Keep right.
Little changes change everything. National Highways.
Like I visit Specsavers? No chance.
No, my daughter doesn't go to Specsavers.
You're having a laugh. My sister goes to Specsavers.
Specsavers? For my mum, it's out of the question. Dad? He hasn't been to Specsavers in years.
If your loved ones can't make it into a Specsavers store, it's easy to arrange home visits. Our opticians are caring and highly trained. To find out if your loved ones are eligible, visit our website.
Running a successful business comes with many different challenges.
Keep right.
Now the need for
Then
good
turn
business
right.
advice is more important than ever. At Barnes Rofe Accountants, we're helping our clients adapt their business strategies by looking at the best ways to build resilience in an ever-changing world. To arrange a free consultation with one of our partners and find out how we can support you and your business, visit barnesrofe.com.
Turn
Barnes
right.
Rofe. Clever accountants for business.
Buy part of a new wind farm and generate your own low-cost greener energy with Ripple. Joining Ripple could cut your energy bills every year for decades, without the hassle of getting solar panels installed onto your home or business. Your own energy to wherever you live, even if you move home. That's real climate action to be proud of. Join now to be part of our next wind farm. Welcome to Ripple. Ripple Energy.
Cruise charming streets, find empty beaches, and discover the countryside's hidden gems. Summer's out there. Rent a car with Enterprise and unlock it for less. Prepay and save 10% on your Enterprise rental this summer. Book now at enterprise.co.uk.
That's fine on LBC.
With Enterprise, unlock your holiday and make lifelong memories.
In 50 meters, turn left.
And it is to you on 0345 6060 Are we doing enough to help Ukraine
Turn
survive
left.
or even win this war? And if not, what are the consequences going to be for us and the rest of Europe further down the line? We just had a very alarming picture painted of possibly fighting on the streets of Europe as early as November.
You have
At the
arrived.
moment, no one frankly believes that, but people never believe the worst case scenario until it actually happens. So much of what happens in Ukraine, and Israel for that matter, will depend on who wins the presidential election here in November. Now, I'm in Florida. The sun is about to rise above the Atlantic, looking east. It's going to be another blisteringly hot day here. Too hot, one could argue, although not if you're sitting in London at the moment. And Florida, of course, used to be the quintessential swing state, but it has actually moved into the red area, into the Republican camp in recent elections, and the number of people I've spoken to here who weren't really convinced by Donald Trump in 2016 or even 2020, who are now going to vote for him. Hispanic Americans, Latinos from Venezuela, from Cuba, but also from Nicaragua and El Salvador and Mexico, who are kind of, you say to them, well, how can you vote for this guy? This is a guy who started his presidential campaign in 2015 by slamming Latino immigrants, by saying, they're bad hombres, they're bad people coming across. And you're going to vote for him. They say yes, because, he's a strong man. We like his anti-communist message. I mean, there's so much stuff going on here. And this, by the way, this man they're talking about, Donald Trump, is on trial at the moment in New York. He's having to show up in a highly refrigerated courtroom, much to his dislike. It upsets him deeply. And let's talk about all of it now with no one who's better to talk about this than Simon Marks, our very own Simon Marks, Washington correspondent, who's got up almost as early as I did this morning. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, Matt.
It's good to speak to you. So this is a very, very big year. We've said it before.
Navigation resumed.
The opinion polls are pointing towards Donald Trump. Anecdotally, as I've just said, I think he's in a much stronger position than he was 4 years ago, and certainly stronger than Joe Biden. Is that the way you see it too?
Yeah, I think that polls that show.
Simon, your line is. Are you still there, Simon?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Your line was very fuzzy, which is surprising because normally you're the master of technology. Can you? You know what? It's still fuzzy. We're going to get you back, so I'm going to carry on talking. And meanwhile, the producer will get you back on the line. But
turn right.
So again, as you know, this is a country of 335 million souls. The electorate is divided 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats, and elections are decided not by the overall vote, because if that was the case, Democrats would win every time, probably. Remember the last election, Joe Biden won the popular vote by something like 5 million, a 5 million margin to Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton
in 50 meters, turn left.
But the elections are decided in a small number, maybe 5, maybe 6, swing states, where, again, the margin of victory can be literally measured in tens of thousands of votes. It's like Hammersmith and Fulham deciding the fate of a vast country and much of the rest of the world. That's what's so extraordinary here. And Florida, as I said earlier, was once a swing state. It is no longer a swing state. It is now more firmly in Republican hands than it has been for a very long time. Simon, are you back?
I am back. Sorry about that, Matt. I think we've had like 5 non-stop days of rain here, so maybe that's had an impact. Who knows? How are you?
I'm very well. You've had the non-stop rain. I've had the non-stop sun. I wouldn't do that. I would never do that, Simon. Not to you. Okay, let's get back to the political picture then. My impression was that actually, in terms of the polls, and anecdotally from the people I've spoken to, despite his judicial travails, despite the fact that he is currently facing the first of 4 court cases, this man, Donald Trump, is actually slightly on the edge of Joe Biden. It looks as if he might. You agree on this?
Absolutely agree. And the difficulty for Joe Biden, as you know, is that the edge is growing in Donald Trump's favour. The latest New York Times Siena College poll, which came out just a few days ago, was, I think, an absolute lightning bolt for the White House, because it shows that after 4 weeks of Donald Trump being stuck in that freezing cold courtroom in New York, facing his hush money criminal case, after weeks and weeks of Joe Biden devoting $30 million of his campaign war chest to trying to erase Donald Trump's advantage over him in many of those battleground states, the crucial states that will decide the outcome of this year's presidential election, as they decide the outcome of every presidential election. Joe Biden's disadvantage against Donald Trump remains absolutely etched in place. You look at the numbers. Wisconsin, Joe Biden has a 2-point advantage over Donald Trump, but that's the only state in the poll where Joe Biden comes out convincingly ahead. In Arizona, you can see big leads for Biden. The same in places money to trying to erase Trump's lead over him in those states, and it's not having any impact. And there's also no evidence in this poll that the criminal case in New York is having very much impact on voters, and it may be the only one of the 4 criminal cases that Donald Trump is due to face that actually gets to trial before the November election. So the Trump people have every right to feel increasingly confident about the state of the race at this very early stage, and increasingly confident that he will be forming a new government next January unless Joe Biden does something dramatic to change things.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but, just to listeners at home in the UK, all Donald Trump needs to do in order to bolster his support is sit in a courtroom as a defendant. I mean, that is so astonishing, but it is the reality. How do you explain that? How do you explain the fact that, this is a man who's on trial for some pretty serious stuff, for accusations, for allegations, for charges that in the past would have disqualified any presidential candidate, and this guy seems to be growing on the yeast of these accusations like no one else.
Yeah, but I think the problem for prosecutors in this case is that the charges against him are actually relatively, certainly compared to the other 3 cases that have been kicked into the legal grass by Trump
Continue
and his attorneys,
straight.
very thin gruel. I mean, falsifying business records, a case known within the district attorney's own circles as the zombie case because it had lingered around for so long that nobody actually believed it was ever
and
going
it's overtly political, they're saying, right?
Well, of course, and Trump argues that the whole thing is political. Election interference, the use of what he calls lawfare against him, and I suspect that the media circus is helping him cement that argument. I don't hear anybody, even here in Washington, D.C., I don't hear people in the cafes, over the dinner tables, over the water cooler, paying very much interest to the specifics of the trial or reflecting the level of coverage that the 3 television networks and all the others, which, by the way, are about to play a pivotal role in the history of American presidential election debates coming up, there's no evidence that the public has latched on to this case, and that there are people out there who genuinely are currently backing Donald Trump today. But if he's convicted of falsifying business records over $30,000 payments that we all know he made to Stormy Daniels, are going to say, right, well, that's it. That's the last straw. I'm not backing him any longer. I mean, there's just no real prospect of that happening.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is that there are many, many things that could go horribly wrong for Joe Biden because he's running the country and he's trying to, balance, juggle the balls in an incredibly perilous international environment. The impression I get is that his position on Israel, where he's falling between 2 stools, he's not pro-Palestinian enough for many young Americans and Arab Americans, and he's not pro-Israeli enough for the pro-Israel crowd. That could lose him the election as well.
I think there's no question that Benjamin Netanyahu at this point is essentially holding the American presidency hostage, and that's in large measure due to Joe Biden's own handling of this crisis since the Hamas attacks of October the 7th on Israel onwards.
is the oldest political playbook, especially for the Republicans. But the fact that he's doing that again and again and again means that he is increasingly shoring up that base that he hopes will propel him all the way to the Oval Office.
Yes, with the caveat that he hasn't completely brought about Republican Party unity, because remember all those voters out there that were backing Nikki Haley in the dying seconds of the very, very brief primary campaign that we had here earlier this year. Well, she still hasn't pledged her support for Donald Trump, and there was no indication that he's going to bring her on board as a vice presidential pick. And so Donald Trump, absolutely, I mean, for him, many of these appearances, I mean, they're binary choices, right? You're a Republican, you're the presidential candidate. Of course, you're going to go and address the National Rifle Association. Of course, you are going to pledge absolute undying support for Israel, even though, interestingly, there are some tensions in the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu that he has expressed. But if you really wanted to unify the Republican Party and declare this election completely over, you'd bring Nikki Haley and her voters on side. But he's not going to do that because he and his advisors have decided that the mistake they made between 2016 and 2020 was diluting the Make America Great Again brand in order to accommodate people that fundamentally disagreed with them. What they're saying is he's running this election with a plan to create a government that will not include any of these Republican experts, members of the Republican elite from the previous era, unless they are proven Make America Great Again loyalists. And he's intent on winning this race without them. And the polling at the moment suggests there's no reason why that can't be a successful strategy.
Which is astonishing, isn't it? Because there was so much store set by the idea that he had some designated, old-style Republican adults in the room who would kind of temper him, and they all ended up leaving the administration. They all ended up absolutely hating him, and they're now very, very vocal never Trumpers. Let me ask you this finally, Simon. I mean, his Achilles heel in the 2022 midterm elections, where Trump didn't do that well, or rather the candidates endorsed by him didn't do very well. We all thought the Trump fever might have broken. The Achilles heel then was the Roe v. Wade, the overturning of the abortion rights by the Supreme Court, and a lot of suburban women especially were very upset with Trump. Is that still the case? And what is he doing to try and win these people over? And does he need to win them over?
Well, the Democrats certainly believe it's still the case. I mean, Joe Biden's election strategy is largely based on galvanizing those voters, suburban women and others across the country who care passionately about abortion rights and making sure that they get out to vote this November. And that's why the Democrats have put Florida back in play, even though, as you were saying, based on the numbers, it's not really in play, but because you've got ballot issues there relating to abortion, they're spending a bit of money once again in Florida trying to attract voters. The difficulty with that strategy is when you look at what happened in 2022, in 2023, in the off-year election, there's no question that abortion brought people out to the polls in key states where it was on the ballot. The White House says, well, that was a huge victory for Joe Biden. The problem
being chased by waves?
In 50 meters, turn right.
The thrill of skimming through the fields of a high-speed reel on a Saga Ocean cruise, or even the joy you'll feel with our Love It First Time guarantee.
Turn right.
If you don't laugh all the incredible first times on your first Saga Ocean cruise, we will give you your money back. 2025 season now on sale. Switch Saga Cruises. Experience is everything. Bookings made in the first 72 hours or 48 hours of cruise assemblies or its full terms apply.
In 50 meters, turn right.
Running a business means wearing many hats. Whether you're riding waves of new opportunity or searching out new customers,
turn right.
There's always another job waiting. But when it's time to put your money hat on, try the bank built especially for established businesses. You'll get your own dedicated relationship manager and no monthly fees. It's how business banking used to be, just better. Get no-nonsense business banking with Allica Bank. Allica Bank is authorised by the PRA and regulated by the PRA and FCA. T's and C's apply. Visit allica.bank.
Meet Darren. Darren never used to like the motorway. Then one day, he discovered a better way to drive.
Continue
now, Darren
straight.
never hogs the middle lane and always keeps at least 2 seconds from the vehicle in front, reducing congestion, collisions, and transforming his journey. Take it away, Darren.
Continue straight.
National Highways.
Only quality landscapers like
Turn
Andy
right.
here gets on checkertrade.com.
Look through there, they'll guarantee our work up to £1,000.
Let's do this. Guaranteed for 12 months, T's and C's apply.
You could be our next Win Plus winner. Enter now to win big cash prizes and loads more at winplus.co.uk. 18 plus, GB only, T's and C's apply.
With the biggest range of cars to buy entirely online, it's no wonder everyone's cinching it.
I cinched it. Doing spin class. Think I'm going to be sick.
I cinched it in this coffee shop.
What are you having?
A 5-door hatchback.
GPS signal lost. Navigation resumed.
With so many great reasons
Turn
to buy,
right.
the nation aren't just nailing it, they're cinching it. Comparison against equivalent retailers. Visit cinch.co.uk/range claim mileage restrictions and terms
In 50 meters, turn right.
LBC.
With
Turn right.
Enterprise, a wide range of vehicles for wherever your holiday takes you.
Now see if you can spell or even pronounce this word. Cryptonosis.
Turn right.
Correctly. This is, of course, the illness that causes prolonged diarrhea and has been confirmed in Brixton itself.
Continue straight. There. Turn left.
The company Southwest Waters now
Turn
fixed
left.
the problem, but more than 100 people have been reporting symptoms of this illness. It is very unpleasant. They were told by the water company to boil their water, don't drink water out of the tap. It is yet another aspect of the ever-growing lake of water stories that have been plaguing us. So also today, protesters at coasts, rivers and lakes across
You have
the United
arrived.
Kingdom are taking part in a demonstration against the state of the nation's waterways. It's been coordinated by Surfers Against Sewage, SAS they're called, who are calling for an end to sewage discharges, which of course have been dramatic and smelly and soul-destroying, as well as, putting you off having a swim in the water like nothing else. Well, we sent our LBC News reporter Shivani Sharma to speak to some of those in Shepperton Lake in Surrey, where the demonstration is taking place. Shivani joins me now. Shivani, describe the scene and what are they telling you?
Well, Matt, this is a lake that's normally enjoyed by open water swimmers, paddleboarders, sunbathers. It's a huge stretch of water surrounded by grass, trees and the great outdoors. But today, the mood has been very different. 200 or so people have turned up, as you say, coordinated by Surfers Against Sewage, in anger at what feels like an endless stream of stories of sewage-ridden lakes and rivers across the UK. You mentioned a moment ago Brixton in Devon being the most recent one, but Matt, they've been holding placards here this morning of Save Our Rivers. One woman dressed up as a turd, which she said to me perfectly characterises the state of our waters and the response to it from those in positions of authority. And I've been speaking to some of the people here, Matt, throughout the morning who've been expressing to me their anger and sheer frustration over the state of our waterways.
I'm just horrified when you think that all of these water companies are paying out massive profits to themselves and then ordinary citizens are having to boil water and getting ill. It just feels so wrong.
Just kind of the water, yeah.
And what do you make of some of the stories over the past few days about our rivers getting polluted?
Well, something has to be done about it, really. It's, in this day and age, we shouldn't be having these kinds of problems, really. So it needs investment, it needs attention.
I think it should be kept clean, and it's so important to be able to do this for your mental health and swimming, that why can't it be separated, and why should it be flushed into the lakes?
Shivani, we all have our favourite waterways, our favourite lakes, our favourite rivers. Some of us just swim in swimming pools for obvious reasons. What are they saying then to you about the importance of Shepton Lake to them?
Well, Matt, it's the theme that's been cropping up throughout the morning is people are telling me about the mental health benefits of this particular lake in conversations that I'm having with them, that they say the sense of relaxation and peace it brings them. And this lake specifically, Shepton Lake, is used also for rehabilitation by veterans and amputees. And I spoke to Emma Patterson a few moments ago. She runs Shepton Swim here, and she's been telling me that it's a vital resource for many people here at the lake.
We've also got many disabled swimmers who suffer from conditions that mean that if they won't be able to feel if there's a problem or if they're getting infections at all, so it is life-threatening for them to swim in dirty water. So this lake is so important.
And there were people at Shepton Lake speaking to Shivani Sharma, our LBC reporter, at that demonstration. It's about water. Of course, water everywhere. The issue simply won't go away. That's it then. Thanks to all of you for listening, for calling in. I am going to carry on doing my work here in Florida. I might dip my toes into the Atlantic, but maybe not. You never know. It's going to be hot again today. I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, and I apologise if it's not as good as this, but there we go. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on the catch-up on the Global Player, where you can also rewind and pause when listening live to LBC. Download that Global Player for free from your App Store, or head straight to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 3 on LBC, it is Vanessa Fells. But right now, it's time for Ali Miraj. Ali.
Thanks, Matt. It's very civilised here in London town this afternoon, Matt, you'll be pleased to know. And teachers will be given protection against blasphemy claims by religious groups under proposals to uphold rights to freedom of expression. It would have been prevented a teacher in Batley from going into hiding after showing cartoons to his students that some found blasphemous. I think it's long overdue. Is freedom of speech more important than the right not to be offended? At one, the Shadow Chancellor is in favour of councils having the power to cap rents, meaning that local authorities could prevent landlords increasing rents above a certain percentage every year. Would rent controls help you? And at two, alcohol abuse is costing 27 billion quid a year in England through the extra burden on NHS and social services. Why do we have such a problem with alcohol in this country?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at midday, the MP for Brixton, where dozens of people have fallen ill from contaminated water, has told LBC heads will roll. 16,000 homes in the area have been told to boil their tap water after the parasite Cryptosporidium was discovered. So far, 46 cases have been confirmed, but more than 200 people are reporting symptoms. South West Water's apologised, but Anthony Magnol says that residents are very frustrated.
From starting this week,
Navigation resumed.
A denial from South West Water that it was anything to do with them, delaying the fact that the boil water notice came in, meaning thousands of people used the water network, to then issuing it on Wednesday. And there are so it's been an absolute disastrous week. The anger is palpable.
Meanwhile, more than 30 demonstrations are being held at beaches and rivers across the UK to raise awareness of pollution. Surfers Against Sewage are demanding more action to clean up the nation's waterways. LBC's been told there are fears more hostages will be killed if Israeli forces launch a full-scale ground offensive in Rafah.